you want to become rich, and I mean properly rich, then aiming for a high salary isn't always the way to go, and there are a few reasons for this. One of which actually made me leave my own six-figure job role to go out and start my own business. But it doesn't mean that you have to start your own business. You can also make significant sums of money doing this from a 9 to 5, and that's exactly what I did too. And before you run off anywhere, I know people on minimum wage making use of this, so it's not just for the privileged or the high earners. So stick around, because today we're going to unpack it, and it might just be the best thing you've learned about this year. For starters, the more you earn in the UK, the more tax you pay. If you earn above £50,270, you are taxed at 40%. And then if you earn above £125,140, you're taxed at 45%. But there is this weird little gap between £100,000 and £125,140, where you start to lose what's something called your personal allowance, which is £12,570. And every £2 that you earn above £100,000 a year, you lose £1 of your personal allowance, which can end up actually being marginal tax of up to 60%. So we really are penalised for earning more in this country in the first place. Equally as well, once you earn above certain thresholds, you start to lose things like tax-free childcare and free childcare allowance hours, for example. If you're a parent, that's a big deal. So some parents actually purposely stay under this level just so they can keep this in place. And there is now studies showing that when parents get to £100,000, they don't want to earn any more because the childcare is so valuable, and it's just wrong. Now, yes, you can obviously bring down the amount that you pay in tax by doing something called salary sacrifice, but then that money is going into your pension and it's locked up until you're 57 and it's taxable on the way out. And that brings me on to my next point, which is about actually creating this wealth, because just cutting out the coffees and the avocados on toast, saving for a house and getting on the housing ladder, putting some money into your pension and your ISA isn't going to make you truly wealthy. You might end up comfortable, yes, but compounding literally takes 30 to 40 years to make a significant difference to your life. And let's say you did earn in the top 10% of salaries in the country, which currently sits at £72,540 a year. Even then, with costs as high as they are, maxing out your ISA, getting significant amounts into your pension is still very difficult. So how do the rich do it? Well, if you look at the richest people on the planet, they all have something in common, and that is owning equity. So that could be part ownership or full ownership in companies. It could also be property that they wrap inside of another company to shield it from tax. But essentially, 77% of the richest people on the planet are entrepreneurs, and the rest are musicians, actors, and film stars, meaning you either need to own something or you need to be pretty good at making music or film. And look, you know, I'm sure we've all had aspirations of being a famous musician or pop star every now and then. I did even make a couple of albums when I was younger, and I studied music production. But the actual realities of becoming the top 1% of film stars and musicians is extremely small. So ownership is key here, guys, and there is ways that we can do this. And I want to use an example which you can all understand in the UK, and that is the pub. Now, before you all go mad at me in the comments about this not being realistic, this is a hypothetical example to explain what I mean here. So let's say, for example, that you listening to this now, you're a bartender and you earn £15 an hour. I know some people earn less and some people earn more as bartenders. It depends where you are in the country. But you're earning £15 an hour and you work a standard 40-hour week. That's £600 a week. And really, there are only 3 ways that you could actually increase this amount. Number one is that you work more hours, so you give up more time for more money. That's what large swathes of people in this country do. Number 2 is you negotiate a pay rise, so perhaps you move up to £17 an hour. Whoop-de-doo, right? And then the last one is you work there long enough so they trust you enough, and perhaps they give you a management role, and again, you can get some more money for it. But those are your 3 options to actually increase your salary in this environment. Now, let's say that this pub goes viral on TikTok, you know, multi-millions of views. And there are literally queues outside of the door. The pub has never been busier. You still just get your wage just like everybody else. Now let's say, for argument's sake, that you managed to negotiate 10% of ownership of the company that owns the pub. You could still work there, you could even go and leave and do something else completely, and one day someone walks into the pub and goes, yeah, you know, this is a riverside pub that's worth an absolute fortune on the River Thames, for example, and they buy it for £20 million. Now your 10% ownership stake is worth £2 million. And that is a lot of £15 an hour, 40-hour working weeks to actually get close to that £2 million, right? But let's make it a little bit more realistic. Let's say that pub sold for £1 million. I bet you if you jump on Rightmove, there's pubs on there for £1 million right now. In fact, I can guarantee that there is. So your 10% ownership in that case would be £100,000, which is 4 or 5 years working on that £15 an hour wage to get close to that, which is more realistic, but it's a big jump, right? £100,000 in your pocket if you had that 10% ownership stake. But yeah, sure, Sammy, this sounds great and hypothetical and all that. How on earth do I actually go out and get me some equity? So let's discuss equity in its many forms so you can walk away from this knowing exactly what to do. Okay, so let's start with the most simplest one, and that is employee shares programs. Now, employee shares programs are very popular among startups and growth stage companies, which is where you join and you get a bit of equity in the business. And also, it's basically because they can't afford big salaries, so they're happy to chuck a bit of equity at you to try and get you in the door, and then you grow with that company. Now, that's a big opportunity, especially if that company goes on to be something. But there are also larger companies in the UK which offer this as well, such as John Lewis, M&S and Tesco's. And essentially, if that company grows, then the value of your shares increases. And the longer that you work there, often you get offered more shares. So it's an incentive to basically help the company to do well. Now, this is actually way more common than you might think. According to the Social Market Foundation, over 14,000 British companies, including other brands like BT and Whitbread, also offer employee shares programs. And it's not just to get people through the door. Psychologically, when you work at that company and you have a piece of the pie, even though these big companies, yes, it is going to be a very small piece of the pie, it's in startups where you can get the bigger equity, you're still going to be working a little bit harder, knowing that the value increases of your shares, then you get more money in your pocket. And in a lot of cases, including my own, which I'll run through in a minute, you can end up earning significant whacks of money. Now, my own dad in the 90s worked for a sound and tech company that used to go into big arenas and fit out all of the stages and the sound systems. And they were a public company, and he had shares in that business. And then when that company sold, it essentially earned him quite a significant chunk. And then in my own journey, when I first joined K&G Hospitality, I actually negotiated some equity when I moved over from a different business, and I became a director of that business. And then every year that I worked in that company, I got something called vested equity, which is essentially, you know, if you work there a year, you get an extra percent or an extra 0.25%, whatever you negotiate. But the longer I worked there, the more that I earned. And then when I left that company, I actually sold my shares back to the business and I earned a sizable amount. And that was actually the amount of money which I used to fund myself doing up the gains for the first year, and it just gave me that safety cushion. But I could have kept it, I could have carried on earning it, ended up being a multi-million-pound hospitality business, but now I own 100% of up the gains, so it's very, very different. Now, an HMRC commission found that the 74% of companies which did actually offer their employees a share program actually retained staff at 84% more than businesses which didn't. So this really does work. And if you want to know how you can potentially do this and see if your own business does, literally go and sit with your HR manager or your team manager and just find out whether the company does offer it, or if they have plans to. I guarantee there would have been some sort of discussion with the directors about whether an employee share program is something they want to look into, and you can push for that, because then your hard work that you're putting into your business is then paid back to you as the company grows, and that's exactly what you want. But equally, if you are on the move soon, this might actually throw a different mindset into the way that you look for that job role. Let's say you were going for a 50 or 60 grand salary, let's call it a 50 grand salary in this case, but then that company offers you a 10% equity stake or a 5% equity stake. You might be willing to drop your salary down to 45% because you really believe in that company's mission and you know you're going to knock it out of the park and do a really good job there. And if that company goes on to be worth 5, 10, 50, 100 million quid or even more, you've then got the percentage which could then get sold and then you get a really nice juicy fat payday. So equity in companies is key. And now you know it can work for someone in a 9-to-5 as well as fully owning your own business as well. But the next side to this is how do I actually increase my diversification of equity? So how do I actually own other companies as well? And you do that through investing. Now, we all know that stocks and shares provides us equity in companies as well. So you can literally download a trading app or a stocks and shares ISA, for example, and buy shares in a company and you've got equity in that as well. That's another way. But there are also other ways which you can buy into growth companies or startups as well. There are platforms out there, crowdfunding platforms out there like Crowdcube. There's many of them where you can invest into growth startups. Now, yes, this does come with higher risk, but I know people out there, for example, that invested into Monzo when it first raised money, and these companies raise money to help them grow to the next level. And now those shares in Monzo, they're probably worth a pretty penny, right? So there are opportunities out there and you just need to be savvy and start looking for them and putting your capital that you earn into places. So putting the money that you earn from your 9-to-5 into potential places that can really grow. But please do remember that when you're doing these growth stage startups or crowdfunding platforms, that they are high risk. Now, the brilliant thing about these companies is that you can actually put really small amounts of money into it, but just make sure that you're allocating a small amount of your wealth portfolio towards these opportunities. You don't have to at all, but it is another way of you owning equity. But look, just with like any investment that you make, do the research. Look into the company that you're actually putting your money into. Don't just make a little bet. It doesn't work like that. There are prospectuses on these companies, PDFs, documents telling you about their growth and their strategies and their mission. You can look into those when you're investing into public companies, so stocks and shares. Do your research about them as well, making sure that they are growing and that they don't have massive amounts of debt. Obviously, those are the basic things that you need to look into. There are a little bit more than that, but research is massively important. Just with every investment that you make, please do put the research in. And look, you don't need to be some financial wizard to actually do this. You can set aside small amounts of your 9-to-5 income to invest into stocks and shares, for example, and potentially even some startups along the way, if that's what you want to do. But then also you do need to focus on looking outside of your 9-to-5 for some level of equity. It will make a massive difference if it pays off. Of course, it's not guaranteed, but it just means you have the chance to earn exponentially more money than you would in your normal 9-to-5. So that's what I really want you guys to focus on. So guys, it's not always about chasing high salaries. And yes, of course, if someone offers you a high salary, take it for sure. But then maybe ask for a couple of % as well on the side. It's going to make a massive difference. It is about ownership in whatever way, shape or form, and diversified ownership across a number of different asset classes if you possibly can. And that is why high salaries can be massively overrated, because we get comfortable. Someone gives us a fat salary, then we don't think about anything else. And we have to start thinking outside of the box, especially when costs are rising. So guys, I hope you've really enjoyed this video. And I think the best video to follow on from this is coming up on your screen just now, and I'll see you guys on the next one. It's been really good fun. Peace.